The Heroes and the Hidden by Kitty Cat on AO3. Episode 9, Chapter 9. Act Like You Really Care. Hitoshi stares at the boy across the room. Quirkless. She had only heard stuff from people who knew someone quirkless. She didn't even think people were still being born without quirks. They were a dying species. That made sense. They couldn't protect themselves. She'd rather have this villainous quirk than none at all. At least she wasn't weak. She could still do stuff, but this boy was weak. He was scrawny. His hair was unruly, his clothes was messed up. He clutched his backpack like it was the only thing that could save him, and it probably was. No quirk? That was useless. The other kids in the room seemed to have taken a step back from Midoriya, leaving him standing at the front of the room scared. He was shaking, standing in the room full of kids deemed villains, and all he could do was stare. Why was he even here? This was for villain kids, the one deemed creatures of violence by society. He wasn't a villain. He needed to be strong to be a villain, and he was weak without a quirk. Even the man he came with couldn't protect him if something happened. He was here, after all. The worst foster home Hitoshi had been to. His life was about to become hell, and all he could do was watch. Shinsou? Makio spoke, making Hitoshi jump. The kids rarely acknowledged her existence, preferring to leave her to her side. Hitoshi didn't mind, but when the new kid was announced, Mato wanted to scare him, and this was her plan. But how can you scare a boy more than telling him he was powerless? The boy seemed nervous, sure, but he also seemed broken. Shinsou? Makito repeated, looking right at her. She flinched. Her quirk was activated through eyesight, which is why her glasses sat on the side of the table. She shouldn't have been without them, but due to the new kid, they were allowed to be without restraints. Well, most of them. Hitoshi winced as a book hit his head hard. I'm talking to you, weirdo! She yells at her, clearly pissed. Take the quirkless kid and go to your room, she commanded, not letting Hitoshi argue. It's not like she could, if she wanted. Her throat was so sore from disuse, and her tongue was swollen and cut. It hurt to even breathe. Now! Makito picked up another book and aimed. Hitoshi nodded quickly, ducking and racing past where Cody sat on the single bed. She nodded for the alimity for it allow. She didn't look back as she ducked under another flying book and ran through the open door to turn the corner out of range. So glad that true villains are all in the same room, he could hear Nobuto say loudly. She knows it's meant to get a rise out of her, but it still hurt all the same. She sees Midoriya behind her, tripping over her own feet. Clumsy, weak. She's gonna love watching him meet their new roommate. As she cracks open the door, he turns back to Midoriya and grins widely. She knows it's a gruesome sight, so Midoriya makes her flinch, want to laugh. This is gonna be fun, rooming with the weakling. Hitoshi! Himiko called, bouncing on her mattress. The door creaked open slowly, making her want to scream from anticipation. Did you bring him? She asked, jumping up off the bed to meet them at the door. Her chains pulled, leaving her a few feet from the door. I want to see! She squeals, bouncing on her heels. Hitoshi grins, stepping out of the way and allowing her to see the new kid. She squeals louder. You're so cute! She giggles, leaning as far forward as the chains will let her. He flinches back away from her, making her laugh, jumping excitedly. His unruly green hair and freckles make her so happy. He's so small, too. She just wants to squeeze him till his eyes pop out and he's covered in blood. She wants to see his blood. The kid steps further away, running into Midori, who shoves him forward, right at Himiko. She laughs, draping her arms over his shoulders, keeping him in place as she looks into his eyes. They're so green, it's adorable. But they're glossy. She frowns. It ruins his whole cuteness. His eyes are so marble-looking, like an old marble. I bet you can't see it, but I'm pretty cute too, Midor, she says, giggling, as he freezes under her grip. Her muzzle is pushed up as close as possible to her face. She can feel his sharp breaths from around the muzzle. It's this pesky mask in my way, she whines, letting go of the boy who's still frozen. He no longer looks at her, but behind her. She frowns, turning around, seeing nothing. Whatever, he's still cute. She does a full turn, hopping over her chain, easily to face him again. Do you mind taking it off? It ruins my whole cute thing. She leans forward, clasping her hands behind her back, as she bats her eyes at him, trying to butter him up. Hitoshi grabs his shoulder and pulls him away from her. Fun killer. Yeah, I know, Mitoshi. She grumbles, skipping back to her bed. She plops down in it, leaning her elbows on her knees, to study the boy. He is really cute. A lot cuter than Mrs. No Sleep, who's currently glaring at her. I gotta say, Mitoshi, he's cuter. Mitoshi stuck her tongue out at Himiko, making her giggle again. I'm just telling the truth. He could use more sleep, though. Eye bags like yours would ruin him. Izuku wanted to scream. He couldn't stay here. This was crazy. He'd rather go to prison. This felt like a prison. These kids are crazy and dangerous. He could see the glint of it in the girl's eyes. She must be Toga. The other kids seemed to make jokes about her. Why? He can feel the dangerous aura radiating off of her. He needs to get out of here. He needs Tsukauchi. He needs help. He could save him. He told him he would save him. Why isn't he here? This isn't saving him. This is making it worse. He can't float away. He needs to stay. The kids around him are dangerous. He needs to stay grounded. He needs to listen. He needs to walk. He needs to run or hide. He'll be small, so small they can't see him. They'll leave him alone. An insignificant pebble, as Kachan told him he was. He wanted Midnight. She could put him to sleep. Get him safe. She was a hero. But heroes left him. All Might left him. His hero left him. Monster. Drip. The sounds of blood echoing in his ears. Monster. Drip. Monster. Drip. He squeals, scrambling away from where he just stood. There's a pencil sticking out the wall. It just missed him. He turned slowly, meeting Toga's eyes. Her eyes squint, as she could only assume she was grinning at him. She stared at him intently. No, not him. His arms. He glanced down. Blood. His blood pooled and gathered on the open scabs covering his arms. He hid his arms behind his back, moving further into the corner. She continued to look at him, hungrily. He could hear her licking her lips from under the muzzle. He held his breath, watching, waiting. She sprung. She ran at him, quickly, before being ripped back by the chains. She gnashed her teeth at him, her pupils becoming stilts. Shinsou threw something at Toga. It was a toy block for toddlers. Toga turned to her, snarling, pulling tighter at her chains. She rolled her eyes before staring at Izuku. She motioned Izuku towards him, before turning to pull something out of the drawer. Why did Shinsou want Izuku? Was she going to hurt him like Toga had seemed to want to? What was she grabbing? It was better than standing here as Toga snarled and pulled him towards him more. This was a different girl than he had just seen, that he had just talked to him. He slowly crept forward at the edges of the room, and then along the bed frame to where Shinsou. Toga frowned at his movements the entire time, no longer pulling at the chains. Her wrists looked red and raw, and blood dotted them. He was going to be sick. Shinsou yanked him out from behind him before patting it with a wet washcloth. It stung. Izuku tried to rip his arm back, but Shinsou was stronger. Izuku was weak. Too weak. He gritted his teeth, turning towards Toga instead. She slowly walked sideways to stand right in front of them. Her wrists were pulled backwards by the chain attached to her bedside. The other kids had said something about blood. Why did she want blood? Was it her quirk? Or was she just crazy? Shinsou tapped his hand, making Izuku look back at her. She held up one finger on his hand. Oh, he was muttering again. It's her quirk? He asked, his voice shaky. He hadn't spoken since talking to Tsukauchi outside, so Shinsou looked at him a bit surprised before nodding. Izuku watched her work, cleaning his cuts carefully before pulling Band-Aid heroes on his cuts. It was a shoddy job, worse than he'd do, but it would do. Shinsou went to pull on an All Might blanket to join the Endeavor and gang Orca ones. Izuku flinched, pulling his arm back. Shinsou stared at him confused, before shrugging and putting it back into the box. Toku watched him carefully as well, her eyes still caught on the newly bandaged arm. Shinsou grabbed something from the bottom drawer of his nightstand, tossing Izuku a long-sleeved jacket. Izuku stared at her confused before putting it on slowly. He watched as Toga pulled slowly, expanding now that the cuts were out of sight. She shook her head, stumbling back to her bed. She flopped on it, facing the wall and putting her blanket up to cover herself from sight. What? Izuku stared at a hand that went over his mouth. Shinsou shook his head, watching Toga as well. Izuku! Naomasa yelled up at the stairs, making Izuku flinch. He would take him, save him from the scary place. Izuku grabbed his backpack and darted at the door before Shinsou could react. He needed to leave. He wanted to leave. It wasn't warm here. Not like the station. He wanted some hot cocoa like Tsukauchi gave him. He would even drink the whole mug just to make Tsukauchi take him back. He ran down the stairs, 2 at a time before tripping on his feet. Stupid, useless, fucking idiot Deku. He plummeted down the stairs before hitting Tsukauchi right in his chest. Whoa, Izuku, Tsukauchi said, settling Izuku back down on the floor carefully. You're gonna hurt yourself. Izuku grabs at his legs tightly, holding him in place. He doesn't want to leave. Maybe if Izuku is strong, he can make him stay. Or make him take Izuku back to the station. Back to the hot cocoa and Midnight's warm hugs. He missed the way Sansa's bells would jingle or Koda's calling to pro heroes in the area. He wanted his mom. He wanted to be called Bunny and bump noses. He misses her. Midoriya, honey, Miss Hondo says, putting her hand on his shoulder. Kachan. It was Kachan. It pressed into his burn painfully. Suddenly, the hand was gone. Miss Hondo, I thought we discussed this. Tsukauchi said sternly. He looked up to see Tsukauchi glaring at her. Do not touch him unless he gives you permission. Miss Hondo nods under Tsukauchi's gaze, but doesn't move away. She's so close. Detective Tsukauchi needs to go back to work now, dearie, she says, looking down at Izuku. They're all looking down. He's weak and small, useless. Deku. Hey, Tsukauchi murmurs, kneeling to Izuku's level, his voice sounding far away. Kid, look at me. Izuku does, staring into his eyes. They look so deep and caring. Does he care? What if we made a promise? Izuku stares at him, letting the words sink in before tilting his head in confusion. Tsukauchi takes that as a cue to continue. How about I visit every month as you settle in? Would that help? Izuku is silent. Tsukauchi is going to leave. He knows he can't stop him. He's too weak, too useless, too much of a Deku. But this way, Tsukauchi will be back. He'll come back to him. Izuku nods, biting his lip. He doesn't want to make Tsukauchi worry. He'll be stronger. He won't be a burden. Tsukauchi smiles warmly before opening his arms for a hug. Izuku dives in, cuddling closer to his chest. Izuku feels Tsukauchi's hands on his back, rubbing in circles. I'll be back next month. Same day, okay, Izuku? He asks, pulling away from Izuku and standing. Izuku nods numbly. He could feel the stares of the Hondas on his back as he clenches back his tears. Tsukauchi smiles again, walking towards the door. He opens it, looks back at the Hondas, nodding, before giving Izuku a wide grin. I'll see you in a month, Izuku. And he shuts the door behind him. He shuts the door on Izuku and leaves him trapped, just like All Might. Monster. Okay. So Naomasa will come back in a month. Will Naomasa see the signs, or will Izuku hide the signs from Naomasa? Also, Toga afterwards felt bad. You could tell, especially the fact that she literally went into her bed and hid herself, as if ashamed of her own quirk. Whether it be because she's actually ashamed of it, and it is self-induced ashamement, which I highly doubt it is, or if it is public ashamement, in the sense of people around her shamed her for it, so now she has literally been conditioned to be ashamed of her desire for blood, which is not a bad thing. I hope the three of them end up being friends. Hitoshi, Izuku, and Toga. I kind of forgot Hitoshi's female name. What was it again? I don't remember. Whatever. I'm gonna call him Hitoshi. I had to keep like re-recording, because I see her, but I know it's talking about Hitoshi, so my mind says, oh, it says her. It's a misspell. Let me just say he, him, his. So if I accidentally slip a little bit of he, him, and his, sorry. Sorry, that's just my inner brain correcting myself for Hitoshi. Chapter 10 is Big Shot, so what? Summary, Naomasa drives away, the Bakugos are informed of the incident. Come take a picture with a real knight, not a charity case. Oh, that's a saying from something. Okay, interesting. I wonder how the Bakugos are gonna react. I wonder. And I also really, really hope that Naomasa saves Izuku from that shithole. I'm trying to think, is villain Izuku a thing? Because this would be a really good way to do villain. No, vigilante Izuku, vigilanteism, homeless Izuku Midoriya. What? Tsukauchi's not gonna save him. Oh my god. Tsukauchi's not gonna save him. Sad. Actually. So sad. Okay, as always, my raindrops, make sure to eat, sleep, drink water, take your meds. Have a wonderful day or night. Link to my Discord server and socials are down in the description. Subscribe to see more of my content, and thank you so much for watching.